Welcome, everyone. This is our final session in our series on addressing pediatric feeding disorders in schools. Today, we will have an overview of our year thus far, and this part will be recorded, and then we'll have an open forum for answering questions. That part will not be recorded, but you will be able to obtain answers to those questions and see what some of those are in the guidance document that we plan to work on and hopefully finish this summer and have available to you in the fall. So with that, I will turn it over to Jennifer to get us started.
All right. Hello, everybody, and welcome back. I cannot believe that this is the wrap up. This went so quickly. And I know we were talking about this previously before the recording started, but for those of you who are maybe watching this later, it's National Speech and Hearing Month. Happy National, what is it? It's Happy Nurses Day for school nurses. It is Educators Week, Teachers Appreciation Week. It is Pediatric Feeding Disorder Month. So all of the big things that we are celebrating here today, very exciting. We wanted to take just a minute to look back at where we've been. And I thought we'd start by putting in the chat your biggest aha moment from our time together. And just thinking about what was the thing that either surprised you the most, or what was the biggest learning moment you had? What was something that really surprised you? Because not only is that wonderful for us to share, but I think it is just great feedback for those of us who worked on this to be able to take this information forward and share it with others. As you are hopefully writing in the chat, again, what your biggest aha moment is, I'm just going to share that there are a number of links here. The link to the handouts and videos and conference attendance is in the chat. The link to today's slide deck is in the chat. The link to that all-important survey that Dawn and I are asking you to fill out is in the chat. And then, as we mentioned, it is Pediatric Feeding and ARFID Awareness Month, and SpeechTherapyPD.com is putting on a multiple hour PD next week, Sunday, May 18th for 0.6 ASHA CEUs, and it's all on feeding and swallowing in the schools, and it's absolutely free. So please, please, please join us. Courtney says her biggest aha moment was the general overall need for this type of training and information. Isn't that the truth? Courtney, I just shared the webinar that I was just talking about on my personal Facebook page, and I had a parent from a child who I saw many, many years ago. This child is a high schooler now, and she said, "Oh my gosh," she said, "nobody in the schools ever worked on this with us," and she said she wished she would have had it. And he's getting pretty close to graduation, so that is huge. Yes. Megan, the biggest surprise, aha, you do not need a swallow study prior to beginning treatment in the school setting. And that's not just in the school setting, Megan, that's anywhere. We don't always want to do a swallow study unless it's absolutely indicated. So that is a great aha moment. Rachel says, feeling empowered and protected. No, let's not make that a question mark. Let's make that an exclamation mark. Feeling empowered and protected to work on PFD in the schools. 100%. Yes. Heather, the importance of all team members being involved and open to learning. Yes, this is a team approach. Absolutely. Tamara says students most at risk in the schools breakdowns. Yeah. So all of those students that we may be overlooking and who aren't able to participate in mealtime. So these are fabulous aha moments. Thank you for sharing those. Keep throwing those in the chat, but we'll kind of very quickly here go through where we began. So way back, back in September. Oh, wait, really quick. Cynthia says she appreciated the clarification that school OTs carry over safe strategies cleared by medical staff for medically fragile children. Yeah, that carryover piece has been something that we've really tried to stress every single time. So we started this way back in September when we started learning about the definition of PFD and what pediatric feeding disorder is, the 4 different domains: medical, nutritional, feeding, and psychosocial. We differentiated between feeding and swallowing, and then we talked about the 4 different phases of the swallow and considered that pediatric feeding disorders within the school system also works within the International Classification of Disabilities Functioning and Health model, or the ICF model. So we started way back there, and then we talked about leading right into students with PFD have that right and need to participate in meal times at school. And I tried to create this really somewhat I don't want to say it's super difficult to look at, but something that said we have students that participate and then they are safe. We have legal implications to that student participation. We have ethical considerations that also interact with legal considerations, and they all interact with each other. So trying to show how dynamic that is. All right, then we talked about, as some of you had mentioned in the aha moment chat here, that the team approach is vital when working with students with PFD. We have students and caregivers, we have outside medical providers, and then we have the school and the district personnel, and they all interact with each other. So we did do an entire day on roles and responsibilities, and we remembered that we need to take into consideration scope of practice and an individual's competency. So let's just say, there might be a PT who may have had some feeding experience, who came from somewhere on the West Coast where PTs do that. We may have a speech therapist who's never done feeding and swallowing, and even though it's in their scope of practice, they don't feel it's within something that they feel safe and ethical to do because they're not competent in it. And so again, recognizing that this looks different for each team, and that scope of practice will remain the same, but competency can change over time as individuals gain experience, participate in active mentoring and training, and when we get into role release, which is perhaps one of the biggest pieces of all of this, as we know that as professionals in terms of speech therapy or OT, we are not necessarily with that child, with them every single meal of every single day. But we do have amazing educators, paraprofessionals, special education teachers who are. And so that role release to them, knowing that they can do due diligence in providing those mealtime experiences. We also reminded you that competency isn't a single course or just a certificate. It's a big overall training, right? And that's okay, Dawn, and that this is just the start of it. In terms of procedures for assessment, we went through the signs and symptoms of pediatric feeding disorder by each of the domains, for the 4 different domains that we mentioned earlier. We talked about and provided you with the available assessment tools. And then we talked about each of the team members' assessments and responsibilities, not only in terms of looking at OT, PT, speech, but we also talked about special ed and paraprofessionals and administrators, and of course our school nurses and our dietary specialists. We, throughout this webinar, have reminded you that school teams are not medical teams, and it is not expected that you will become a specialist in pediatric feeding disorders. We stated that the #1 best practice consideration is to develop enough expertise to ensure student participation and safety, which is really the driving force for this entire webinar series. So this means recognizing what is outside of the current skill set of the IEP team, collaborating with those medical team members, and possibly contracting out for services when indicated. In terms of school teams in Wisconsin, we are really, again, we are trying to encourage collaboration and implementation versus forcing direct therapeutic intervention. There are some people who feel very comfortable with that. We recognize, though, that that is not everyone. And so our big push has been just for collaboration and implementation, or just carryover. Before training, we recognize that school districts should have adopted a plan and procedures that includes identified team members. And as Dawn mentioned, we're going to be finalizing that paper in the summer, or book, really. It's probably going to be pretty long to give you guys some guidance on that. And then we provided you with this flow chart as far as how do we go through the process from referral to case history and obtaining medical records to interdisciplinary interview and assessment, into the IEP, the development of what we called that safe eating plan, and also the health emergency plan. We talked about training of personnel, then going into consultation and monitoring, and reminding ourselves that we can revise the IEP and safe eating plan whenever it is indicated. In terms of training and implementation, again, remembering to assess the competency of district staff, talking about coaching versus training versus mentoring, and where along that continuum do we see the needs of ourselves and others that we work with, and reminding ourselves, most importantly, that when we're training to feed someone, that we need to, first of all, have procedures for training, and then to do the training or to do the feeding with implementation and fidelity. We talked about barriers and concerns, and specifically acknowledged time, knowledge and skills, liability concerns, and administrative support, some of which we've already talked about, and then we also went forward in talking about. And we talked a little bit about goal writing, and we're going to pause here and continue with this a little bit more. And I just want to acknowledge in the chat here, Valerie said, including all players in the planning for student needs, members may bring unexpected experiences that benefit all. That was a really nice example of that teaming, and can help us exactly when we're working on goal writing in that IEP moment. So we talked about, and Dawn really had highlighted, considering utilizing the collaborative goal development rubric from ASHA, which meant that first, you identified educational impact and consideration of the student's strengths and needs. Second, you indicated the student's present level of performance from the lens of each team member, going back to exactly what Valerie had said. Number 3, developing a collaborative goal. Number 4, determining how each team member will support the student to achieve the goal. Then going into number 5, determining how data will be collected. And number 6, having a plan for follow-up. We included those links on there again for you, but they're also in the previous webinars. So we had a beautiful example here of a goal from Dawn. Student will demonstrate improved participation by consuming snacks and meals safely and efficiently in order to maintain adequate nutrition and hydration throughout the school day. But we wanted to take some time to practice now and talk about some more goals. So I'm going to flip to the next slide here. And here are some more example goals. I want you just to look at those for a minute and sort of take this in. So this is from an article in 2014. So it's about 10 years old, but I was really excited to find it. It's called Turning Meal Times into Learning Opportunities, Integrating Feeding Goals into IEPs. Now, Dawn was really, who's really the expert on the IEP end of things, gave me a little bit of feedback, which I wanted to share with you, which is a reminder that we don't need to have short-term objectives, but I do think that these are really great to look at. So for example, for this little girl that they've named Ella, Ella will increase age-appropriate feeding skills to prepare for kindergarten. And then they had a number of short-term objectives there related to oral stimulation and adult models that she can practice that for tolerate that for a number of minutes, for days, that given placement in a feeding chair, a preferred spoon, and praise that she could accept a minimum of 5 spoonfuls of textured foods. And then number 3, given adult and peer models that she could demonstrate mealtime manners such as waiting turn for food item and saying thank you, which also pulls in a nice goal there related to social emotional skills. So I will note, like some of these, like given oral motor stimulation, that's not really a goal as much as it's a treatment technique. But again, it's great to see all this information in here for all of these kids, and just some examples of what are you looking at in terms of your goals and some of the treatments that you're doing. Again, Courtney said no short-term objectives required unless the student has replaced a curriculum, which may apply to many students with feeding needs, right? I'm going to defer that to Dawn.
Right. So if they are considered in the 1% or those students with the most significant needs and on the alternative standards, then short-term objectives are required. But you can include short-term objectives with any goal, but they're not required for the majority of your IEPs. Thank you for that.
Thank you, Courtney. It's a really important piece to remember for ourselves who are writing IEPs. This little article that I found also included some examples of progress monitoring that I wanted to share, such as anecdotal notes, tallies, checklists, criterion referenced assessment systems, and then the performance graphs. And again, there's an example or description of each of these in here. I think it's always important for us to look back at how are we progress monitoring? How are we taking data? How are we making this appropriate that everybody can do it effectively and efficiently? And then in terms of an overview, they had, again, in terms of an overview of putting together a goal, they had stated that there were some steps to integrating feeding into IEPs, such as developing the feeding goals, developing the short-term objectives as needed, integrating feeding goals and short-term objectives into classroom activities, routines, I love that, routines, and community-based instruction, and then going back to that progress monitoring. Okay, so we're going to go through with some of our colleagues here who have been with us because I did not do this alone and I could not have done this alone at all. So I wanted to hear first of all from Anne, our speech and language expert, who is going to share a little bit about some of her testimonial in terms of where have we been, what have we learned, what other suggestions does she have for us?
Hey, thank you. And good to see everybody here today. I can't believe it's the last one either, but time flies. So all right, so some of the things that I've done in my in my past work in the schools has been to work kind of as sometimes I was the lead person with getting the feeding plan going, and it really helped, I found, to go to a swallow study with the family just to help support them and explain details to the family. And then after coming back to the school, and I met with the nurse and the staff to inform them, and it kind of explained the suggestions that were given in the swallow study. And then I would go into the classroom and I would go in during, or the lunchroom, and I would go in during breakfast or snack or lunch times and model and show strategies for implementation. And many times I needed an OT or a PT to help me. The OT was working on self-feeding or some sensory regulation issues, and then some of the kids were quite physically involved, and so we really needed our PT to help out with seating and positioning. And I have to say, we really worked well as a team, and we would demonstrate everything for the staff, and then we would all work together. And then when the staff felt confident, we came up with a form that they could sign that says that they were trained, and that would go in a file for the student. And then frequently I would go in to observe either during a snack time, during a lunchtime, and then, as I said before, co-treat as needed. And that was really an effective strategy to use with many of our kids. And then most students had a notebook, and we found that it was really helpful to let the parents know how the consultation went on that particular day or the treatment session, and what they ate or drank and how it was tolerated. Sometimes it was a lunch provided by the school, and we had educational assistants who would follow up, and they had blenders in the classroom so that they could blend the food if needed, or we had thickeners so that they could add baby cereal to liquids, for example, or whatever the student needed so that they could swallow or so that they could do their feeding safe. Safety is the main concern. And we always invited parents to come in if they wanted to and observe. And then we'd do like the teach, train, model, and then have them do it too. Sometimes parents came in with really, really good suggestions and something that they had tried at home that they found that really worked well. And so it was a good collaboration time for the families and the teams working with the child. So that's about it.
And Jen, you're muted still.
Oh, sorry, I'm unmuted now.
There we go.
Oh.
Thank you. I really appreciated, Anne, your reminder about including parents and caregivers and how important they are. We had talked very specifically in one of the webinars about making sure that we had the opportunity to observe them feed the child, because caregivers are instinctive with their children that they care for, and they oftentimes have figured things out, and they oftentimes are doing things that are very appropriate to support that child that we may not know, or they may not even know that they are doing. So that's great. Thank you, Anne.
Thank you.
Okay, and Michelle's going to cover the motor therapist, the OT
Mhm.
and PT. So I'll hand it over to you, Michelle.
Yes, thank you. I could almost really verbatim go back over pretty much what Anne just said in a lot of ways. But as she mentioned, the OT and the PT are working, the OT specifically is going to be working primarily on the self-feeding skills, focusing on how involved that child is in bringing that hand to mouth in whatever way, using utensils, or finger feeding, those kinds of things, what is developmentally appropriate and medically and physically appropriate for that child, and creating any types of splints or adaptive equipment that that child might need to complete those activities. I'm sort of going with the bottom two bullet points at the moment. And then, of course, the PT is working a lot on that positioning and what's going to be the safest, most reliable, and most I suppose, not quite the right word, but easiest way for the faculty and staff to position that child to be safe to eat, so that they can provide that information to the staff who will be working with them, because of course the PT is not there all the time. And we want to make sure that that PT and that OT can transition. And as you look above to the top bullets, collaborate, consult, and train the staff and faculty working with that child to follow through with it when the therapists aren't around. Because as we know, the best follow through and the best outcomes occur when that child is able to do the feeding and the eating as much independently as possible, as much as possible. So not just when all the therapists are there, just when the experts are there, but as Anne even said, providing that sign off for other staff members to be able to show that they were trained and know how to facilitate the appropriate eating and feeding skills for that child. And then I will just go back with what Jennifer was talking about earlier, that role release and that team process are just really the most important pieces here, and being able to communicate with each other and understand which are the ideal opportunities for each of the professionals to jump in there. And, you know, I'm going to say, ideally, as Anne and Jennifer have said, the parental involvement is key, and identifying things that worked at home and work at school is fantastic. And sometimes you find that they carry over and sometimes they don't. And there are things that might just work at school better and things that might just work at home. So that's really the overview, I think, of what I've experienced as a therapist working with kids in schools and feeding.
Michelle, you did a great job of, again, highlighting the importance of that role release, especially when you simply said, we may not always be there. And
right.
And so you need an expert. And so that to me said two things. First is, especially our PTs in our school system, oftentimes you have one PT who's covering multiple schools, right? And so the PT is most often not going to be the easiest person to find. Secondly, is the idea that when we do consider role release, when we do the training, when we do the implementation, when we get to that point of fidelity, everybody has become an expert.
Right.
Fabulous. Yes. Okay. Thank you. All right. And now we have our nursing end, and she's joining us from far away, but decided to hang out, even though she's really in sunny California.
Thank you. So,
okay.
Yeah, so I don't know that I call this a testimonial but aha moments, or what I think is most important from my perspective over the several months that we've been doing this training is, again, that school nurses really can be a valuable member of the feeding team. My personal experience and what I hear from school nurses before this these sessions is that lots of times they felt like they were the person that everybody was going to for feeding and instructions and how to do this. Obviously, the OT, PT, and speech and language therapists who have been part of these webinar series don't feel that way, and they have been involved, but sometimes school nurses haven't seen them, or you're not in the school districts where I'm hearing from school nurses that people are asking them for their expertise and thinking that they should be the expert in feeding students. So so grateful for this, and grateful that there are all the other professionals out there who also are taking responsibility and see their role. Again, school nurses can still be a valuable member of the team. One of the things that I just actually caught just, today as we're listening, I had put down that orally feeding a student is not a delegated nursing procedure. I would like to explore, at least think about that. What I'm hearing for the first time in my ears is that there's a difference between what OTs, PTs, and maybe SLPs are saying as role release, and what school nurses are saying, or think about as delegated nursing procedures, and that they remain responsible. And I think so school nurses are, again, I think one of the issues is that school nurses saying, feeding a student's not a nursing procedure, so I'm not delegating it to you. I'm not retaining responsibility for it. So I like that term role release. I don't know that in the nursing world that term necessarily is used, or that concept is the same. So I think that that's very interesting to think about that PTs, because nurses aren't there either, but PTs do a role release, and that's kind of an interesting concept versus that PT is totally responsible, that just like nurses are when they think that when they are legally delegating procedures. So that's an interesting concept that I'm actually thinking about and hearing about it for the first time here. But school nurses, as we've said before, have expertise in contacting medical providers. So I think one of the roles that they can play on these feeding teams is to help obtain medical orders, get health information. Obviously, it is a team approach, and the more people that have had contact with the family or understand what the family is saying, probably the better. But again, I think school nurses can either take a lead role or be part of that. Again, tube feedings, which is a form of feeding, would be a delegated nursing procedure under the right circumstances. So in that case, but then there might be other things being involved, because you're also trying to get do some oral stimulation or some things like that, or maybe you are working on some coordination things that an OT person might be working on. And then again, we have talked about that school nurses probably are appropriate role for them would be to help assess staff training and safety needs when it comes to like choking incidents, and working with staff about how to respond to a choking incident, again depending on the circumstances, and again might work particularly with a PT to say, okay, here's how we would do this if they're sitting in a wheelchair, or if the person is different because they can sit in a regular desk or at maybe a regular lunchroom table, how you're going to respond to a choking incident might be different. And then along with that is that school nurses would write a health plan or emergency action plan for students, so that might be part of their role. So that's kind of my aha moments here.
And Louisa, I want to acknowledge that my biggest aha moment from doing this, because I certainly learned from doing this too, but my biggest aha moment was that reminder that that you as nurses are liaisons to medical staff. And so that was fabulous. So we're not done yet. It does say thank you here, but we're gonna sign off for those who are watching this on recording. But we're gonna stop the recording and keep going now into the open forum portion of this, so that we can hear from you and chat with you. So feel free to either unmute yourself or raise your hand. because we want to hear from you. We want to problem solve. Did you want to talk about goals? Did you want to share a little bit about a case with us? Did you want to give us some feedback on something? This is sort of our next 20-25 minutes here of safe space where we can continue to work together and learn from each other. So Dawn, have we stopped the
Sure.
recording?
Jennifer, before I officially stop the recording, I
Yep.
just want to remind those of you who aren't here live and are watching this recorded version, please fill out our survey. And those of you who are here, please fill out this end of series survey. You can scan the QR code now, or Michelle has been putting the link in the chat as well for you. That really helps us with letting us know what you've learned and what we need to think about when we're putting this guidance together this summer. And then I just want to officially thank Jennifer for being our presenter throughout this series, staying with us this entire year and helping us with the planning and facilitating this, and our entire feeding and swallowing team. I have so enjoyed working with all of you and, you know, really accomplishing this goal of providing this guidance in Wisconsin. So with that, I will officially stop the recording and we will move into the open forum.